welcome back to Novel Idea. My name is Dia. Today I have an end of month wrap up, basically the last few days of the month and what I was able to read. Let's get into the books. So the first ones that I want to go over are ones that I read for Foodie February, which is being led by Ashley at the Untrained Librarian and Sophie at Redhead Reading. And the first one is Uncultivated, and this is by Andy Brennan, and I really enjoyed this one. So I was born and raised in the western half of the United States. I grew up in apple country, and this book completely fascinated me. So Andy Brennan is an agriculturalist, but he decided to do something that was still beyond his knowledge base at the time. And that was to gather apples from wildlings and pippins, which wildlings are trees that begin from other trees, part of a wild apple tree. Or it has started from seed, which is a pippin. And I didn't know either one of those terms before reading this book. But he decided to gather those and then make what is called farm cider, which is very similar to just a small batch wine, but it's made with apples, and it's made with wild apples. He runs experiments and he talks about the different zones that he finds these wild apples in and what that does to the taste of the cider and all of these different things. He's a real proponent for making sure that we allow for small business to really thrive. He talked about business, making sure that it was still about him and about what he was going through, and not making it this big global thing or this even national thing. It was just specific to him. It was wonderful. I just really enjoyed it. Then I read The Food Explorer, and this was a little bit not what I expected, but I was reading another nonfiction at the same time, and they weirdly overlapped, even though they were completely about different subjects. So the other one that I was reading wasn't for Foodie February. It was just a buddy read that I was doing with Talia from Bandana Book Mom. I'm sorry, the Food Explorer is by Douglas Stone. The explorer in The Feather Thief, the same explorer that inspiration for the Food Explorer in Douglas Stone's book to go about gathering different kinds of fruits and vegetables to bring to America to expand our culinary horizons. It did a good job of balancing the fact that this was a wonderful thing for America to have these new and dynamic kind of fruits and vegetables coming into our lives and into our culture and being able to be grown here. And also an advocate for leaving native plants where they belong. He talks about the fact that this explorer really wanted to make cuisine in America a very broad and inclusive and wide reaching thing. He, went to Italy and brought home lemon trees. And he went to Mexico and South America and brought home avocados and peppers and all these different things. The thing that happened in that was he also brought to America many insects that rode along with these cuttings and rooting that never went through any kind of customs check or anything. And we ended up with predators for our native plants and for our people in America that never would have been an issue if they would have just remained in those other countries. And so it did a very good job of balancing those two issues of saying this is something to really celebrate, but it's also something to learn from. So the next one that I read was A Homemade Life, and this is by Molly Wizenberg. And it is stories and recipes from a life dedicated to food. She said, as she says, raised in the kitchen. All of her core memories, all of her really motivational kind of memories in her life revolve around eating together, making food together, going to a restaurant and trying something new with her parents. There were some stories in here that I could have done without, but she talks about it in one of those ways that you would expect a child who's just discovering something to talk about food. I picked it up actually because one of my girls reminded me of a story that I told them when they were little, and it came from this book. Like I said, just really fun to be able to look back and be reminded of things from my own childhood that were really special for me and what made those things special. The final one that I read for Foodie February was A Brief History of Coffee. It was just that. It was a history of coffee. I did not realize how far back coffee was known of and how early in our written history it was put down as they called it a liqueur back in the early days of food writing, basically. There were times when it was such a big deal in a nation's history that kings and governors tried to ban it. I wish it would have told me a little bit more about specific kinds of coffee and like where they come from and make certain ones more desirable than others, or where they're grown makes them more desirable than others. But nonetheless, it was still fascinating to read. It was so much information. Even though it was a brief history, it was so much information that I know I'm not even coming close to remembering it all. Okay, The Feather Thief. It had a little bit more of the author inserted into the story than I wish it would have had. But that is my only real complaint about the book. I was completely caught up in this weird multi-million-dollar heist that happened, and the person that decided to commit that crime and the outcome, the hunt, all of it was fascinating. A young man, and I do mean young, I think he was 19 or 20 when the crime was committed. The most unlikely of people, who was not caught for well over a year. I think it was almost 2 years. And it was incredible crime, I should say. completely unbelievable. Like, I just can't imagine, with everything that we have at our fingertips now, it would have been solved much sooner if it was, being investigated nowadays. But there were all kinds of little loose ends that both Talia and I were like, wait a minute, but what about, and why didn't they? And so it was fun to read with Talia. So, The Feather Thief, Kirk Wallace Johnson. Then I read To Shape the Dragon's Breath. And this is by Moniquil, Blackgoose. This was really unique. We were getting wonderful world building without info dumps. We were getting this very unique language of a fantasy realm, a fantastic protagonist, a girl who is very much a girl, but also she's forthright and she is firm in who she is and what she believes, loyal and kind, and I really liked her. The story is basically about her island nation that is part of a larger nation, but they have not had really any interaction with anyone outside of their island in a very long time. And then she finds a dragon's egg for a type of dragon that is supposed to be extinct. Anyone in this world has to report their dragon, their connection to that dragon, and be trained in ways to keep that dragon basically from harming others. It's just this wonderful story about everything that she goes through, but also about what it means to have these deep-seated, firmly rooted foundations in your life, and what that looks like then when you have to go forth into a larger world that doesn't hold those roots and doesn't hold those foundations. It was so well done and it was lovely, and I liked the story, I liked the characters. The only thing that is keeping me from moving on in this is that the next one, the way that this one ends, it was set up to be way too relational in the next one. And it's YA, so we're moving into, he likes me, I like him, what are we gonna do about it? That kind of stuff, and I'm just not there for it. So I'm going to call this one a win, and I don't think I'll be moving on in the series. Then I finished The Vicar of Wakefield by Oliver Goldsmith, and I read this with Tiffany from Beautiful Minutia and Stephanie from Ms. Richards Reads, and I really had the most precious time reading this book. It was funny, it was poignant, it made me so happy and so edified reading this story. So we have a vicar who at the beginning of the story is not wealthy but not poor either. He is just enamored with his wife and his girls and his boys, and he absolutely adores them. And he just feels like the luckiest man in the world to have this family around him. And of course, circumstances change, and they have to move to a different parish, and yet he does not change. And his beliefs that he holds to with such faith and such fervency, his ideals stay firm. And he has a parish of parishioners that adore him. His family really loves him. He's a bit too lenient at times with certain things because he loves them so much that he kind of doesn't see harm in allowing them certain leniencies. Of course, things take a turn, and once again, those beliefs and everything are tested, and yet he is still somebody that you just are so amazed by, because he is still the same man that he was when everything was going his way. It feels very reminiscent of the book of Job in the Bible, and it also reminded us several different times of Jane Austen's novels. I loved it. The only thing that brought it down for me was that there was a convenience to the ending that I felt just did it an injustice. I just wish it would have ended a little differently, because that was the only thing that kept it for me from being just tippy top, cream of the crop kind of book. But I loved it. I think everybody needs a Dr. Primrose in their life. He was wonderful. Vicer of Wakefield, Oliver Goldsmith. Then I read The Long Loneliness. This is by Dorothy Day, and I was reading this as part of the Lenten read-along, and that is run by Christy at Dostoevsky in Space, Emma at The Bookish Princess, and Faith from Faith in Books. This is a confessional story that involves her conversion, and it's autobiographical. It was good. I just wanted something a little more Christ-focused for Lent, and so I initially was thinking that I was going to be reading it through all of Lent, and I just decided I needed to be done with it, so I finished it up and then moved on to something else that I could read for the rest of Lent. All right, the next book that I finished was The Adventurers Guild. It's by Zack, Loran, Clark, and Nick Eliopolis. I think that's right, Nick Eliopolis. Middle grade book. It was one that I really wanted to read this year, but it didn't really fit into any of the prompts for middle grade March. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to read it right now. It is about a young boy who is half elf, and he lives in a city of surviving humans, some dangers that were brought into the world through a wizard who opened a portal, and the wizard was half elf, and so he's not looked upon with favor, but he has a best friend who has protected him and stood by him for his life thus far, and he is human, and he also is of a wealthier class. They have what is similar to the giver in that they're at a certain age, there's what they call a guild culling. And there are certain guilds within the city, and each one of those guilds works to ensure that the city stays safe and protected and thriving in spite of the dangers, which is the monsters that were released into the world through the portal. So he and his best friend have just come of age. The Adventurers Guild, who are the ones that basically go outside of the city walls and hunt the monsters and try to ensure outwardly that the city is taken care of. They have precedence and are able to basically invoke a draft if they want one of the other guild's people. And they do want our main half-elf boy. They want him. So when they draft him into the Adventurers Guild, his best friend acts as tribute and volunteers. And then it is just about the adventures that they have. And it's about growing up and finding family and friendship where you least expect it. Coming to trust and depend on people that you never would have if not put into situations where you really needed to and they didn't let you down. I think that there are more books in this series, and I am going to look for them and read them because I really enjoyed it. Next, I have Beatrix Potter's Gardening Life. This is by Marta McDowell. And this was enchanting. It was so lovely. We have letters, journal entries, watercolors, articles that Beatrix Potter produced in her lifetime. And it takes us from when she was a child up until she was very elderly and unable to take care of the gardens and things in the Lake District any longer. I just loved it. The way that Beatrix Potter describes what she does, what she sees, how things smell, what she thinks about those things is completely enchanting. So magical. And I loved every moment, and it doesn't take very long to read through this book. It was done in probably 2 sittings. It was just wonderful. I really enjoyed it. Lastly, for this wrap up anyway, I have Bicentennial Man, and this is part of Isaac Asimov's robot stories. I picked it up specifically for Bicentennial Man. And I know there's a movie out there and I haven't seen it, and I probably won't ever see it, but I loved this story. Science fiction, futuristic world, and we have begun to master artificial intelligence in the form of robots. And our main robot is placed in a very influential family, but they are more than just influential. This family is kind, understanding. They really come to love this robot and want him to thrive and want him to quote unquote be happy. And then it is about his journey to become as human as he can. because he wants to experience all that humanity is, because he has come to love humanity through this family. And I just loved it. I loved it. The writing was really easy to follow. This is condensed and it's very simple to understand and it's very easy to read, and I loved it. I loved it. So that's everything that I have read in these last few weeks since I did a wrap up. So that's everything. Thanks for joining me today, everyone. And I would love to know if you have read any of these and what you thought about them down in the comment box. Like if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to, and I will see you in another video very soon.